and Zoom meetings and all that. It's I think that we all need to learn work-life balance, and I haven't gotten there yet. So so are we formally starting now, Jeremy?
Yes, we are. We are.
So I think for those of you who were on the call a week ago Friday, at the end of the call, I made a comment about listen for the mayor's announcement. It was sort of a tease because I knew that the mayor was going to announce another $20 million rental assistance program, and part of that was we helped form it, and I think that I know we were all disappointed about the ordinance last time, and I will tell you that the ordinance discussion and our involvement in that precipitated the additional $20 million that the city put in. And I'll tell you also that the recovery czars have told us multiple times that all of the money is spoken for, and don't ask for any new money for rental relief for residents or anything like that. And the pressure that got put on by the ordinance issue and the debate, and then our group coming together and which most people thought we could never do, but coming together as a team and proposing what we did with a compromise ordinance pressured the city to do something, which was an additional $20 million. So I think that's really interesting when you think about the discussion of whether people are listening to this task force or not. They clearly are, and there are lots of political reasons that they do what they do, but at the end of the day, we are making a difference, and I appreciate everybody who was involved in that process, and thank you for your votes. And now we're trying to reconcile the city and the county's programs, and I know, Jeremy, you might chime in on that. I know Stephen's going to talk about it in a minute. So we are making a difference, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate what you're doing. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Oh, yeah. Rick, I just want to echo your comments, and I appreciate your leadership, particularly as it relates to the ordinance. We're going to kind of readjust our agenda as you got it from yesterday, and we're going to jump right into the rental assistance program with their working group and recommendations. Stephen can talk more about it. But again, I just want to thank you all for your continued work on this particular effort. So, Stephen?
Great. So thank you, everybody. And we are going to send out a revised and updated agenda. So you will be getting that in your email momentarily, along with the document that you will also see that we will be working our way through. And I'll just say, I think one of the things I'll talk about a little bit later is how our rapid response efforts are going. And there are obviously so many things happening at the same time that I want to just acknowledge that can both feel chaotic and simultaneously frustrating for people. So, we've tried to create as many mechanisms to gather feedback, and things are not as, I'd say, linear and laid out and methodical as all of us would like it to be. So we're just in this crazy period right now, and appreciate everybody's flexibility and understanding with that. And I especially appreciate the ability to people, when we've asked for very quick responses, the people on this task force has just been remarkable about setting aside other things they're doing to be able to provide us opportunities for feedback and meetings. So with that, I think what I want to just let folks know is that as Rick mentioned, the after the group had developed the recommendations for aligning the rental assistance programs, the principles that came out and were voted on by this group, Rick and Jeremy and I had an opportunity to present them to the recovery czars, and I think they were very enthusiastically and warmly received. And then over the course of the period since then, sort of Baker Ripley as the contractor for both programs began to get the specifics, and it became quite clear that there were some big differences in various components of the city's program as it was currently then, and the counties and the timing for the rollout, et cetera. And so there's been a lot happening this last few days. And so what we thought we would try to accomplish this morning is to have Renee Solis from Baker Ripley present as the current state of the sort of major buckets that are in the city and the county's program. And you will get a document along with the revised agenda, if Claire has not yet already sent it to your email boxes, that kind of explain those big differences. And then we will then have Diana walk us through some of the work that the full rental assistance working group has done. We basically tried to lay out on a single document the differences between the current county and the city's programs, and then tried to have the working group sort of try to make recommendations within the parameters of what they had set out, and then even some things where the city and the county hadn't laid it out. And so what we will then do is have Diana present an overview of that, and then we are going to get into small working groups and specifically get reaction to what people think about the documents. So with that, I think I will turn the floor over to Renee. I'll also say when the working groups are through, sorry, one other quick thing about the agenda. When the working groups are through, we will do report outs. If there are suggestions that people have to change certain things that are currently in the document, there will be a team that will be modifying based on the working group recommendations, and then trying to put that back into the unified agenda recommendations, and we will come back at the end of the meeting to vote on the recommendations. In the meantime, I will be kind of just presenting a little bit of an overview of the work we've done over the course of the last month together, as well as what we have in the weeks ahead. So with that, let me turn it over to Renee. And Claire, if you'll unmute him, and then Renee, you need to unmute on your
end. Let's see. Renee, you should be unmuted now.
How's that?
Yes, both you
Very good.
are unmuted now.
Thank you so much. And good morning to everyone. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Task Force, for the opportunity to share where we are today with the rental assistance program. And of course, I also want to thank the City of Houston and Harris County and the donors who have provided the funding so that as a region, we could respond to the urgency of what's happening for rental for many of the vulnerable populations we all serve. So I was asked today to just kind of brief everyone on where we are with the rental assistance program. Again, through the efforts of the task force, as Rick mentioned in his lead-in, the city did provide an additional $15 million in CARES Act funding. And they also worked with the philanthropic community to identify another $5 million. So we have a total of $20 million coming from the city and philanthropic community. And that goes in combination with $25 million that was previously approved by Commissioner's Court. So we do have Harris County and the City of Houston and the philanthropic community, along with the nonprofit community, coming together to address these concerns of potential evictions and housing insecurity that many folks are facing through this pandemic. So again, big thank you to them for that. As part of this, some of you may know that Baker Ripley has been selected by both the city and the county to administer the programs for their respective funds. And we are very humbled by that requirement or that request that we do that. And we are putting our best efforts forward to deliver on those expectations. So the early conversations that we've had, again, aligned with what the task force has been coming with, is that we combine the funds, or at least combine the program, so that it is a one-stop shop for both landlords and tenants, that we have one unified approach to how we distribute rental assistance programs for the region. So both the city and the county have agreed to some of that, to some of those terms. And again, I think it's been because of the good conversation that we've had, both through the task force and with the city and with the county. So Baker Ripley has unified that approach, and we have one website for both landlords and tenants where they can enroll and submit their applications for assistance. So the website is now live. Phase one of this was to get the website live this week, and it went live early this week, so that both landlords and tenants can see the information, start digesting it, start seeing what they need to do to prepare for the next phases of the website. So the websites, there's one website, but you could access it through 3 different web addresses. You could go to harriscountyRentHelp.org, or you could go to HoustonRentalAssistance.org, or you could go to BakerRipleyRentHelp.org. The purpose of having the 3 URLs is so that each of those organizations, whether it's the city, the county, or even us at Baker Ripley, we could advertise within our own branding and get the information out to the community at large. At the end of the day, no matter what URL you type, it again brings you back to a common place where both landlords and tenants can complete their requests to participate in the program. So the challenge for Baker Ripley, which is the challenge that I think some of the challenge I know the task force is trying to address today, is how do we find further alignment from just one website and one process? Because the terms and conditions for both funding streams, both the city and the county, there's still some variance in that. As the administrator of the program, we're here to provide information and provide support, but ultimately we recognize that the funders make the decisions on their particular requirements for their funding stream. So going through this, what I'm going to point out again, you could go to the website, HoustonRentalAssistance.org or HarrisCountyRentHelp.org or BakerRipleyRentHelp.org, and you can see for yourself sort of what information is out there for the program. So about the program, so just real quick on timelines, the different phases of the project are outlined here in this process and timeline. I'm assuming you all can see the website. I'm sharing my screen. Okay, good. So the first phase is technically phase 0, which is the week 1, where we get the information out, get the website out, make sure everybody's understanding the information that's put out there, so that everybody has a clear understanding of what's happening in the subsequent phases. So here in phase, so that's phase 0, which is complete. Website's up, resources are up, people can see that. The next phase is phase 1, which is landlord enrollment. So from August 17th through August 26th, landlords will be able to enroll in the program. And as the task force discusses the subsequent, or as the subsequent discussions about this continues with the task force, I want to point out that this is a very important phase because in both programs, a tenant can't apply if a landlord does not participate. So one of the objectives, at least from the program administration perspective, is that we have the right number and the right types of landlords participating in the program. failure to do so only impacts the tenant. So if certain landlord requirements end up discouraging or determining that landlords will not participate, then that ultimately affects, in many cases, the tenants that we're trying to serve. So I want to point that out as the task force has further discussions and digs deeper into those conversations. So everything that both the city and the county gives us in terms of landlord requirements, that's passed on in the landlord agreement that essentially the landlord has with the program administrator, in this case, Baker Ripley. Once we do the landlord enrollment, we move into phase 2, which is tenant applications. So the tenant can only apply again if the landlord accepts the terms and conditions of the funding stream. So again, if a landlord doesn't apply, and this is a volunteer program in terms of both the landlord and the tenant, if the landlord does not volunteer and wants to participate in the program, then the tenant can't participate in the program. And that's, again, the condition of the program design, where landlords ultimately receive the payments and landlords have to agree to certain terms and conditions of the funding streams. So there will be tenant applications will be open the following week, August 24th through August 30th. As you have heard and may have heard on the media, this is not, again, it's not like the first round where it's a first come, first serve. Every tenant should have plenty of opportunity to enroll in the program because we're giving them 7 days to enroll in the program. For those who are not able to enroll on an online program, they will be able to, we'll have separate call centers where tenants can call, and partners in Baker Ripley, the county, the city, they're all helping out in ensuring that no one is left behind in terms of their ability to apply for the program. Then after we receive all the tenant applications, then we enter into phase 3, which is application selection. That is where we impose or we use all of the other requirements from the funding streams to determine, based on priority established by those funding streams, which applicants go first. So it's not a first come, first serve program, but it is a program, or at least both funding streams are established in such a way that there is a prioritization method. So based on those funding streams, then we will select which tenants go first. And again, usually that's based on some vulnerability prioritization methodology. Then once we select the tenants, then we'll work with the tenants to make sure they qualify for the program. At that point, we'll request any additional documentation that's required. And I will point out there that the City of Houston has a streamlined process where documentation is not as required as it is with the county. So I will point that out. So most of the follow-up work that we'll do in documentation will be with those tenants who have been selected for county funds. And then finally is the payments to the landlords. Once we have determined the tenant eligible, then the payment goes out to the landlords as the requirement in both programs or in both funding streams. Throughout this process, what I will also mention is that we have a number of communications and notifications that go both to the landlord and the tenant, so that both of them are informed about what's happening, both with their landlord agreement, with their landlord enrollment, as well as what's happening with any specific tenant application. So in a nutshell, that's it. For the purposes of this committee, or this task force, excuse me, for the purposes of this task force, I want to point out how we attempted to describe the variances between the two funding streams. So for the landlords, if you go to the landlords page, you will see what are the terms and conditions for the landlords. You will see three things, or three boxes. You will see the general terms, which are terms that apply to both funding streams, both the city and Harris County funding streams. Then you will see what applies specific to each funding stream for the landlord. So here's where you see the variances or the differences between the terms and conditions of both the Harris County funding and the City of Houston funding. So it's all there. Tried to simplify that and message that in such a way that landlords can understand what they're signing up for and what are the conditions, terms and conditions of each funding stream. Again, it's only one agreement, but the landlord does have, again, as a volunteer program, the landlord will have the opportunity to opt in into both or one or the other funding streams. And they will only receive, and we will only approve tenant applications for that funding stream. For tenants, similarly, what we've done is try to explain the two programs or the two funding streams as well. So for tenants, if you scroll down on the tenant eligibility requirements, you will see the two tenant eligibility requirements that apply to both funding streams. And then you will see the award amounts for these the two funding streams. And then you will see the eligibility requirements of both funding streams. Again, more information on what it means for both funding streams. And lastly, for the tenant, we tried to simplify what will be required from them in terms of documentation for eligibility under both funding streams. So at first, you'll see again what is the common documents that will be requested for funding for both funding streams, and then you see what documentation will be required for the Harris County funding stream. So in summary, or in closing, I want to again thank the City of Houston and Harris County for allowing us to provide a one-stop shop for both landlords and tenants, and for their willingness to work with us to set this up. I do recognize that the task force is interested in bringing or closing the gap between these variances between both funding streams. But I do appreciate the work that's been done so far and the allowance and the permission that both the city and the county has granted us so that we could at least get to this point now. So thank you again, Stephen and the task force for allowing us to share this information. And I want to encourage everyone to please tell landlords, tell tenants that the website's up. We want to make sure we get these resources out as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Renee. Could you remind us what is the URL, or could you put it in the chat just so we all have it handy? That would be great for the website. I think, you know, Stephen set us up pretty well earlier. A rapid response group came together, kind of as Renee has really, you know, gone above and beyond to share information and help us understand the two programs, and just, you know, a lot of work to try to already work with the city and the county to bring these two programs together in a coordinated and unified way, which I think is something that makes you know, just sense for multiple reasons that I think we all agree based on the principles we voted on. And I just want to pick up on what Renee said in terms of, you know, gratitude for the city and the county and the negotiation work that has already happened. We totally understand that there is great complexity and in design choices and priorities and politics, and understand that ultimately we're not the deciders, but we want to take this opportunity to really at least bring the data together. As you see in this document, huge value in bringing kind of these design differences all in one place, and at least offering some sense of guidance and principles based on how this task force is really aiming to try to balance landlord and tenant priorities and really create a program that's robust and reaching the most vulnerable populations that most need this assistance. But I think it's really clear there's more opportunity to bring into alignment. So I think that's what the rapid response team aimed to do. We met yesterday. I'll just go through quickly the names of the people who participated and provided input into that. So, you know, Chriselle Anna, Sonia, Sharon, Renee, of course, Mark, Howard, myself, Maria, Celeste, and then support with Martha and Stephen and Elaine. And then we also received excellent input into that meeting from Kyle and Mary and John. So with all of those players, we reviewed essentially all of the differences, and we really did listen to Renee's, he had clear priorities in terms of what the greatest sticking points were. I think at the end of the day, there are not just landlords and tenants, there's also the administrator priority, and how do we create a program that's actually efficiently operated. And so that's another set of just realities that come into play. And I think Renee reminded us then and this morning about, we need the right landlords in the mix in order to reach the populations that we want to serve. And we also want tenants to be, who are most vulnerable, to be housed as long as possible. So there's just a lot of things we're trying to balance. But I think this is a straw man. And with respect to who the ultimate decision makers are, we are really framing these as principles, as high-level recommendations, and then providing the data to dig into some negotiations and hopefully just accelerate some of those conversations between the right players. So really framing this, not as, prescriptive, but really just a starting place for those negotiations to continue. So I'll just run through the document a little bit. We're emphasizing, Claire, if you could move down as I go. We're emphasizing the desire for a combined, unified, and coordinated city and county rental assistance program at the top. Through great conversation, and I think, Howard really pointed this out, we need to think about some of these design choices together in a bundled way. So we started off with landlords. What are the set of requirements of landlords? And here we're recommending looking and considering the 10% discount, a commitment to no notice to vacate for assisted tenants any earlier than the end of the month following the month in which rental assistance is provided. That's in alignment with the principle that we've already adopted. Require a no interest payment plan for any excess debt owed above the maximum assistance provided. Align on the amount of rental assistance that could be provided. So we have on the county side an up to $1,200 mark, and on the county side an up to $2,100 mark. And that is, I think Renee and others have pointed out, just inequitable. And so how do we propose and support alignment there is really important. And then offer all tenants the opportunity to enter into a payment plan, essentially. So this is operationalizing the GRACE ordinance for any tenant in a complex, for any landlord that receives rental assistance on behalf of tenants that are supported through the fund. And then for tenants, really, there's a difference in who is eligible from an income standpoint. So really encouraging a look at that and deciding and determining, who is ultimately eligible. How are we reaching the most vulnerable populations? And the rapid response team really focused in on income pre-pandemic. So are we focused on low-income families who were already low income that we know are in a more difficult place now? And really, in some ways, to kind of, avoid the same issue that we had before, which is to kind of narrow the funnel coming in as much as possible, because we know that there are just so many people in need, and ultimately we cannot serve everybody. So can we reduce the harm done in having to reject, essentially, people who are not eligible, are not going to be selected in the prioritization process. So the other piece here is that prioritization, in line with the principles we'd already adopted, prioritizing families with children, under the age of 13, and really focused on the lowest cost housing adjusted by household size. So what that means is looking at monthly rent, adjusting by household size, and prioritizing those who are already in low rent, low income housing, and you know, working down that list, essentially of priority. Looking at vulnerable geographic areas of the community and prioritizing that in some way through a weighted selection process, which is, you know, random selection is a part of the county program. Not given the long-standing pandemic and knowing that there are multiple rounds of funds and multiple rounds of assistance needed, being open to previous recipients rather than closed off in terms of those who've already received rental assistance. And then big differences, again, Renee noted, big differences in the documentation required between the two programs. And that has a massive operational impact and also a time impact. So if we're trying to get money to landlords and tenants as quickly as possible, the amount of documentation really matters because it's a lot of work and back and forth with those families. So really encouraging minimal documentation verification requirements and maximizing the flexibility, or at least ambiguity in some cases, of the CARES Act and compared to other federal programs. So that is the high level, you know, meant to be summary of major recommendations. We can, as a work group, as we move into the work groups, we can, you know, really reflect and step back. Are these the top priorities? What do we want to draw most attention to in the first page of the document? Given how strapped people are in time, I believe strongly that the first page is really important. So what we say there should be really our top priorities. And then moving down the document, I won't go line by line here, but this essentially is even greater detail in terms of each of the policy variances between the city and the county, starting off with landlords and then moving to tenants and then closing out with prioritization. So some of it overlaps with what I just went through, but there's a little bit greater detail here and a really incredible framework, I would say. This data hasn't been brought together for either the city and the county, I don't think, beyond the website that's now up. But kind of does that, a side-by-side comparison, and then offers the principle that really supports sort of the recommendation that we're making. So I think this is a good start for further discussion. Stephen or anybody else who was on the team, anything I missed that's important to call out?
No, I think that was really excellent, Diana. And so I really appreciate that. I will just also say, you know, Renee has been nothing short of amazing that they've kind of been able to, you know, be building all of this and simultaneously being able to jump in and help our working group members. I mean, we can't say enough to thank you, Renee, for just how incredibly responsive you've been. So what we are now going to do is, you know, break into the working groups. And I appreciated the fact that Diana just gave a list of the things below. And what we really want to do is in the working groups, ask everyone to reflect on whether or not you think that the recommendations that are here in this document align with the principles that we shared last week around the rental housing. And again, maybe if we haven't, Claire, I don't remember if we had sent that document out, but if not, we can just send that out as an additional document. But that was the set of basically 10 recommendations that we came up with. So the first question is whether or not you believe the working group recommendations align with the rental assistance principles. And then second is, in the event that you see anything on this document that you really believe needs to be changed before we vote on it as a full task force, let's go ahead and identify that, and we'll ask you to explain why you believe that is the case, so that then people understand the context. I think at the beginning, there will be a facilitator in your working group, and we're going to ask people who had been on the rental assistance working group to be part of the report out. We think we're going to try to spend about a half an hour in this, depending on how much people feel there is to talk about these things. So if there are any questions that anybody has before we walk in, jump into the work groups about process, if you want to send them out on the chat or raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll very quickly break into the work groups. Okay, so everybody enjoy your individual workout work groups, and we will see you back in somewhere between a half an hour and 40 minutes at the most.
And the person with the phone number 713-906, I just wasn't sure who that was to put you with the right room.
That's Maria. I can't remember what group number it was though.
Great, I will put you in there now.
I'm with Martha.
Okay, perfect. I will send you that way.
All right, thank you.
Hi, Elena. I'm going to unmute you, but for a second, I can put you into Jeff's breakout room if that works for you. Or if you just want to wait.
I'll just wait. Thank
Okay.
you. Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and I think we're starting back at 11:10 is the plan.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
No problem. Bye.
Okay. Is everybody, I think we're all coming back in. Okay, let me just ask this. All of the facilitators have been capturing real time the information, and I think from what I'm hearing, there are suggested changes that people are going to want to make. And so the dilemma that we've got here is that we've got some revisions to this document that we're going to want to make before we adjourn the meeting so we can vote on them. And I need that group to be able to go. So I'm going to ask the group of people who are going to be working on facilitating the changes to go ahead and go, and you can excuse yourselves from the big group and go do your magic, and then we'll ask everybody else to do the report outs on the group. As you're doing the report outs, I just ask you to really try to be mindful of our time, because we're now going to have a new document that we're going to need to review at the end that hopefully will synthesize and incorporate a bunch of the feedback we have. So, and just remember, everybody, that the program's going live Monday. We've got to be super selective if we're going to be able to have any impact or influence on any of the key decisions. So we want to really be prioritizing that. So, okay, with that, why don't we go ahead and do the report outs? And I think, Claire, you've got the list of who's doing the report out, so I'll just let you unmute and call on people.
Great. I'm going to start with group 1, which I believe is Zoe. So I'm unmuting you, or letting you unmute yourself.
All right, I will finish up my frozen cherry snack. So in our group, we had Tom, Rick, Margaret, Dana, Stephen, Curtis, and myself. And we talked about, I think, same as everyone, what was aligned and unaligned. We, I think, all agree that the cost management and debt reduction efforts make sense, but having differing dates for different programs is difficult for people, and having different dollar amounts for different programs is tricky for folks. So the closer we can get the city and county to agree on dollar amounts and dates is important. And those dates are like, how long should we offer protections for, eviction delays for, and that kind of thing. We sent Dara back to the document with a few things to incorporate. One is providing more specificity on what an eviction delay looks like from the tenant side. So I know personally in my work that a lot of people will self-evict when they see a notice to vacate without enjoying their right to due process. So we wanted to be very clear that what does it mean for a tenant or for a landlord that is accepting money on behalf of the tenant to agree to have an eviction delay? Does it mean that they don't verbally harass them, don't send them threatening text messages, don't actually file an eviction? What does that look like? What do we need to get them to agree to for receiving this public benefit? Margaret pointed out that we should find some way to think about the folks that are at 51% AMI that have no other form of housing assistance, because those people are super vulnerable and will be out on the streets if they're not targeted and their landlords aren't targeted. We also talked about the need to get better landlord and housing stock data, especially participating landlord data. So how many of our landlords are small holding landlords, that kind of thing, to make sure that we're, again, targeting the funds where there's extraordinary need, and that we're targeting landlords who are in extraordinary debt and who might actually, because of the way the market's set up right now, be incentivized to evict folks because of filtering and people filtering down into cheaper or lower cost units. And then there was another piece that we had said about future funds, and knowing that this is going to be an iterative process, but what we will make promises and program guidelines for future funds in future months, that we are really constrained in the current program design and stipulations that we put forward. I think also another thing that's important to surface is that the difference between a mediation, which has no set result, and a payment plan. was something that we wanted to be very clear on. And that's something that's unaligned between the city and the county. So yeah. And then we talked about a lot of other interesting things, but we're cut off by our gentle but stern moderator because they were not specifically in response to the question. So I'll save those for y'all later.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to move on to group 2, which is Mark. So I'm unmuting you now.
Thanks. Really vibrant discussion as to, and so a number of things the moderators will have captured for future discussion. As to the 2 points in question, are we in alignment with the principles? Yes, we are in alignment with the principles. Do we have things to add and finesse relative to vote prior to voting? The major suggestion was to that 50% AMI, to bump that to 60%. That'll be captured. And then a point was raised about the fair housing implications of targeting assistance specifically to ages of individual, i.e. children. Thank you.
Great. Then I'm going to turn it to group 3, which is Jeff Reichman.
All right. We had a spirited discussion. We had agreement on the tenant provisions. There was a lot of discussion on the landlord provisions, specifically around payment plans. I think we were in agreement that payment plans are a good idea, but there was still not enough clarity around how those payment plans would be structured and administered. So we didn't get to any consensus on those recommendations. There was also no resolution on the 60-day period and how that impacts notices to vacate and evictions. We also had a discussion about increasing the prioritization for children from 13 years old up to 16 years old with a rationale of it being working age, although, you know, working age can be as low as 14. So just some discussion about increasing that potentially, and the potential to amend language around the payment plan structures that is not only interest fee, but also no additional fees. And so we did not come to a consensus on everything, but we had a good discussion.
Great. And our 4th group, Mary. So I am asking you to unmute yourself.
Okay, so yes, we think that the recommendations conform with the principles adopted by the task force. We wholeheartedly support encouraging the city and county to have a unified program. We think a separate set of recommendations for each is too complicated and will deter participation. And we are specifically concerned about landlord participation with the requirement that if one tenant receives assistance, the landlord is prohibited from evicting and requiring to enter into a payment plan for all tenants. We think this has a real danger for larger properties that serve lower income folks, that this will deter those landlords from participating. We have one specific recommendation that on the section about income qualification, it should be clarified that whether it's 50 or 60% where we're ending up, that is current income and not pre-COVID income. The way the document's written right now, it initially refers to pre-COVID income and then says 50% AMI, and we think that it should be current income that's taken into consideration. We also talked about, we did go off script and our moderator didn't stop us. So we talked about how to make sure that these recommendations can be considered and hopefully adopted by the deciders. So we talked about a media strategy as well as a advocacy strategy, specifically with county commissioners after the task force recommendations are shared with the recovery czars. And that's it.
Great, thank you. So I'll turn it back over to Stephen.
Okay, so I think at this point that we're going to try to make some revisions and we'll come back to the document, hopefully probably no later than 11:45 if that's doable for the team that's working on it. So y'all can just hopefully let me know. All right, if we can, Claire, why don't we pull up the PowerPoint on the overview of the streams of work. And what I hope to do over the next few minutes is really just share a little bit about where we've been and where we're going. So next slide, please. And this slide you'll see is very similar to the slide that we presented last week with one little modification. But in essence, we really identified, it should be 4, that's the danger of doing last minute edits. Should be 4 distinct work streams as opposed to 3. But the 3 we had identified first were responding to immediate requests and opportunities. Second is beginning the working groups that are going to really work at developing solutions to problems. Third is really just this developing our shared understanding and knowledge base of important issues. And then fourth is really just the infrastructure of what we need to support the work of the task force. So let me start with, in this area of really trying to look at being responsive to immediate requests, a lot's happened over the course of, the next slide, please, Claire. A lot has happened over the last few weeks, and I'll just give everybody a minute to take a peek at this. As you're looking at it, what we tried to do is put in italics when there was work that was done by the city or the county. And so just take a peek to look at how much has happened over the last few weeks. Okay, and I mean, I think, I'll just obviously highlight the fact that the city and the county have both allocated very substantial dollar amounts and doing it right at about the same time and trying to move them out, even as we were experiencing the end of the COVID, the CARES Act protections and the end of unemployment insurance. And I think the very fact that even when we got together at our prior meeting at the end on the 17th, the notion that we thought that there would likely be a congressional resolution of some sort of the unemployment insurance payments, and the fact that Congress is now adjourned until September, I think really heightens the importance of the fact that whatever hopes we may have for answers coming out of Washington are just that, and that we have really got to, as the local community, figure out that what we're going to do, recognizing that the resources we have are what they are. Next, let me go, if we can, Claire, to the first of the working groups that we launched. And I think, again, that's obviously been what the bulk of this meeting has been about, on really trying to think about how we would do rental assistance design. And as we learned about some of the ways that we knew that we were going to need to continue to improve efforts, I think then we convened and just this week, just in terms of significant efforts this week, we had a sort of a large number of the members of the task force that joined us on Monday, where Elena presented overviews and learnings of prior disaster response and the coordinated efforts and the lessons learned from that. Diana gave us an overview of the city or the county's funds and the private funds that the Greater Houston Community Foundation had, and then Renee gave us an overview of the city. So really trying to capture all of the learnings of very big buckets of works, and then immediately shifted into how do we take those learnings and apply them to the task at hand of $45 million that between the city and the county are being allocated, recognizing that each of them is trying to move money out the door immediately, and we need to try to do our best to help. The other thing that I will just say, in the meantime, one of the things that we knew we might want to do is to begin to think about a way of targeting funding geographically. And, you know, one of the things that we learned from Renee and the prior effort that the city had is that when they had some extra funds, they did a really, really excellent analysis looking at what they thought would be the areas where the money should go and where it in fact went. Renee then walked us through a very complicated math formula that he himself seems to have developed to make sure that the additional leftover money they had was allocated appropriately. And then they were able to really take the remaining funds and target them in a really, really nuanced, but really, really impactful way that I think really stimulated our thinking about how to do geographic work. And then, you know, I think as we look forward, there's work to do in this work to really think about how we are going to be gathering data and really debrief these recommendations. Obviously, there are a lot of moving pieces, and we're all trying to come in and make things better even as we're doing things. I want to turn the next slide and really highlight this is a really interesting map that just is not, you know, designed to do anything other than be illustrative for right now of the kind of support and excellent support that we're getting immediately from some of our partners. This is a map that the folks at the Kinder Institute did to really try to look at whether or not we could come up with a geographic representation of where renters were vulnerable. Elena and Diana, I guess Diana explained to us that when the prior individual assistance money from the county was allocated and appropriated, they used the social vulnerability index. And then this is taking that general work that has been developed and really, really taking some other elements to it. So this document, we asked the Kinder Institute to look at where people had filed for unemployment insurance, and then where evictions had occurred, where there were cost burden housing areas, people of spending 30 to 50%, and then where people were spending more than 50%. Appropriate weights to them and begin to allow for an index. And so as you can see from the composite score they have, they basically divided every area and they developed them into quintiles, and then the red areas represent the areas of what we would call highest vulnerability for renters. And again, as we think about how to allocate buckets of money, I think hopefully what we will see is either that our existing processes look at the way they're designed, that's where the money is going, or alternatively, we begin to think about how to make recommendations to really allocate money based on geographic areas, so in order to be able to reach the most vulnerable folks with the dollars that we have. Next slide, please. I really just want to call out the everybody that's joined. We've had both members of the steering committee and this was as we were developing the recommendations for the rental assistance feedback that we're giving to the city and the county. For the first time, we were able to draw in non-task force members, and you all will begin that that we really aspirationally wanted to be able to do that, and we will continue to want to do that as time goes on. Next, I want to look at, that was rental assistance, and then we've also now looked at launching an Access to Justice working group. This work, we believe we will kick off in earnest next week. We've had a lot of really good back and forth conversations, particularly with Janae and Sophie and Commissioner Ellis's office, that really had been the place where I would say the impetus for this was done. And I think we've been able to work with them to get a better feel for where and how the task force can be useful, and where there's stuff going on that we don't really want to get in the way of. You'll remember when we had our initial one-on-ones with you, we really asked people to help us think about how to make sure that we're staying in our lane and mindful of other things that are going on. And I think that we've got a pretty good idea on this Access to Justice now as to how to make sure we stay in our lane. And so we will begin constituting the working group. This is also a friendly reminder that if you have not let us know which working group you want to be in, you're going to be hearing about this one. And then you'll see in another slide or two some of the new ones that we think will be coming up and going in the next few weeks. But you know, the key piece here is that we, I think, have two very big important buckets of work that we've identified. One is there's got to be better information for tenants that are struggling to try to figure out what to do, and landlords who want to be able to help their tenants figure out what to do. So we will be hoping to build very quickly, and then improve as we go, a central public education portal that will be very available to everybody in the community. Second is, I think we can all agree that when something reaches an eviction court, it represents the end of the line, where the landlord has gotten so frustrated that they have decided they have no recourse other than to go through the legal process. We want to really try to figure out how to reduce that, and really figure out, can we do a lot more prevention and upstream efforts, and have gotten amazing support from the Houston Bar Association, particularly the Houston Volunteer Lawyers Program and the Dispute Resolution Center, who are really helping us think about how to move and really create a system of mediation that does not currently operate well. The only time it really seems to come into play right now is once somebody is in eviction court, and really try to see if we can get that up and going earlier. So that's work to follow that we'll be getting on. Next, let me just look at some of the pieces that we've identified so far as potential additional areas of work. The first two I just mentioned. I think there's also been, you know, a real notion that there needs to be better coordination in some of the important areas around providing legal assistance. Some of the feedback that Elena has allowed us to see from some of the focus groups is that for families that are going through the eviction process, it can be very, very challenging to navigate the form of assistance that's there. Second, I think we've recognized that there is a need for people to really be able to figure out where and how to adjust their housing situation, recognizing that they've had significant adjustments in their income. They may need to go and find new housing, and the system by which they can identify and find available housing and relocate there is something that we really need to build better community infrastructure on. Next, we'll note that it is very clear, and we said from the outset, that our task force wanted to look at both landlords and tenants. And from some of the anecdotal as well as survey data that's been done nationally, there seems to be a very clear sense that landlords, particularly smaller landlords and landlords that provide housing at the lowest income level, are already experiencing significant cash flow problems, and many of them are unable to meet their existing obligations, both from the standpoint of meeting their operating costs and of enormous concern also their payment levels. So the bigger ones, as you all probably know, Fannie and Freddie, have agreed to do some forbearance, can work out things where people get money on the back end, tax credit properties and others sometimes have reserves to draw from. But these smaller ones particularly represent a big challenge, and it represents a potential double calamity if those properties end up in foreclosure, because not only then do the properties get lost, but those tenants immediately get evicted, and that just will create all sorts of additional problems. So we're really looking at whether or not figuring out how we can get some patient capital and provide some lending to smaller landlords is something that we can come up with. And then the last pieces, I think we have not yet begun to map out more definitively, but clearly the need for additional financial supports and potentially even temporary housing solutions, working with the homeless service provider community in the event that more funding is not coming from HUD or from the federal government. We're clearly going to have to figure out what to do as a community. And then last, I think there continues to be an interest in exploring policy and advocacy responses to the current situation. So let me go to the next slide, and this next slide is really around how we are building the shared knowledge base among this group. And again, we started off at our kickoff meeting talking about evictions. At the next meeting, we talked about the overall state of rental housing. This past week, as we said, we moved towards the presentations on rental assistance. I think one of the clear pieces of feedback that we have gotten is that there's often too much to do in these meetings, and there's a real appreciation people have for the work that we're accomplishing in small groups. And so we're really going to be trying to move to having the alternative week when the full task force meeting is not meeting, to have a longer presentations and allow people to listen in and dive into issues. We will be able to record those so that even if you're not able to make them real time, you're able to go back in and tune in and listen to those. And we've identified already some of the areas. So for example, I think hoping to tee up that there is work that Elena and her team have done just with some remarkable landlord-tenant focus groups that they've captured as a result of people that have gotten some of the assistance. And then the last slide, and we'll also bring in here some of the work of other communities around the country. Last, we'll just talk about some of the streams that our Backbones work is doing around the need that we know to communicate better what this task force is doing, additional data and research, and then I think really being able to engage folks outside of this task force well. So that's a very quick run through. Let me now, I think, turn it to Elaine to maybe provide the real-time update on the rental assistance recommendations. Hoping that group is through.
I'm logging in my video. Give me a couple of seconds and I'll be able to share my screen in a minute. So Claire, I'm logging in from my computer, so this will remain as my audio. But, Hello, everyone. Okay, I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Doing my last change. Here we go. Okay. First of all, thank you for your suggestions and confirmations of what is going well and what should be adapted in this document. We understand in the last 4 weeks, we've been doing a lot of rapid response work, and we appreciate the last minute calls and your voting process and approval that you are providing. So I'm going to go through the changes that we've heard from the groups. I would like that if anyone is in non-agreement of these changes to place it on the chat as we go, and we're going to consider those. I'm placing those in red. Let me make sure that we can have this bigger here. Okay, so the first change is, we have the commit to no notice to vacate, but there was some conversation about what happens between communications between tenant and landlord during that time. So we are adding considering establishing allowable communication strategies between tenant and landlords during this period to prevent any harassment practices during the protection time. Second, require an approved no interest payment plan that goes beyond the protection period for any excess debt owed. And then also considering not allowing other fees to be charged during the payment plan period. Then on the difference of or setting up a rent amount, there was huge support to at least say to consider a higher amount than the lowest range for both city and county to approve or select the amount they want to move forward, but that it should be higher than the 1,200. Then there was also discussion or agreement to raise the area median income to at least 60%. And to consider both pre-pandemic and current income. There was also conversations about the prioritization of families with children to raise it at least to 16 years old, and to at least mention that maybe it should be checked against fair housing guidelines. There's the question about if some of these funds will require that or not. But we still want to share that families with children, there's evidence that they are the most affected during evictions, especially single parents. And then those changes have been incorporated into the chart. There was a comment about considering removing the lowered discount, because then it's a minimum discount that might not do a lot if landlords are not applying because of the discount. However, then this goes back to the rigorous evaluation, and that's something that I was not able to include yet. There was discussions about having here in the summary that we want to see rigorous evaluation of these programs and potentially seeing a bigger documentation of which types of landlords are receiving assistance in terms of size or property types, to have a better idea of the profiles of landlords that are applying to this assistance. In future recommendations, something that was brought up in my group as well was that to consider adding another principle into the general principles, that we would like to see a combination between not only rent assistance that go through the landlord, but to have a component of direct assistance to people that it's more flexible. So it's always kind of paired there. And just here to make sure that it's not only the difference between program design, but also prioritization that might create an unnecessary confusion and stress for both tenant and landlords. So those are the mayor changes. Not sure, let me check the chat if I'm seeing anything. Okay, so there's a conversation about pre-pandemic or current income in the chat. Should we remove that altogether or say both, or if there's a preference? And thank you, John, for that clarification. We are going to consider that. I think it's good language clarification. So any, okay. Any, how do you want to address the income question, or if we want to address that right now or not? If you raise your hand, Claire can also unmute you, or if you want to write down. Yeah.
So one of the things that I think Renee had suggested is that you can bring people into the pool who are below, let's say 60% now, but then have questions within the application such that you can prioritize the people who had incomes below the 50% pre-pandemic. If Renee's still on, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing what you said, Renee. Oh, Claire, can you unmute Renee?
Renee, you should be able to unmute now, yes.
Thank you. Yes, we're structuring the program not just for the funding that's available now, but potential funding that could be available in the future. So our recommendation was that we do raise it to 80% so that we could have a larger pool of tenants that may either now or later be eligible for the funding source. So this is just the, let's call it the initial prerequisite for eligibility. And then funding is actually allocated based on the priorities that come later on. So for example, you could have a family that's 80% of AMI, and now we have them in the pool of tenants, but then they're prioritized because let's just say they have children under the age of 16, or let's say because they're in a vulnerable geographic location. So it's, again, just to reiterate, it's the initial assessment to get them into the pool. And then once they're in the pool of applicants, then you could have other prioritizations. And again, thinking further, if funding is available later on, maybe you could extend resources to those families as well. So that was our position on why you'd want to consider a higher area median income versus a lower area median income. Now, in the case of the county, in their program, they're using 50% of AMI, but because it's a lottery system. So in essence, your entry point is the prioritization. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Great, and I'm also gonna, Diana has her hand raised, so Diana, I'm gonna unmute you if you wanna make a comment. You should be unmuted now.
Yeah, Renee, just to clarify, the city, my understanding is 80% AMI pre-pandemic. The county is 50% AMI current, so it's like apples to oranges. So when you say 80% AMI, are you saying 80% AMI pre-pandemic or 80% AMI current? What is that exactly?
All right, gotta wait till I'm unmuted. So it is that on the city of Houston right now, it's pre-COVID-19 income, because that's how they are addressing and prioritize vulnerable populations. They were vulnerable before the pandemic, and they are now more vulnerable after the pandemic. The city, the county funding is post-COVID 80% AMI. So they're looking at it from the perspective that you could be vulnerable at this point after the pandemic. Now, with the county, it's still a lottery, so you'd pull from there. And also with the county, what I would indicate is that they have to show impact of the COVID-19. So in both cases, for how we brought both programs together, is we are collecting both pre-COVID income as well as post-COVID income, so that we could identify under which fund source a household might be eligible for.
So maybe just if I can, to suggest something here, that it seems as if this group, Renee has given us what I would call sort of reasons that they want to broaden the eligibility to be able to capture people for future purposes who may not get funding with this assistance. Is that right, Renee?
Again, it could be for that purpose, but the other purpose is also you could have families under 80% of area median income that fall under other priorities. So a priority of children under age of 16 years old, or a priority of a vulnerable geographic area community. Again, it's the area median income is the minimum entry point, and then from there you could fall under one of those priority groups that this task force is considering.
Okay, well, maybe what I would just suggest is that at this point, we really try to figure out how to, I think what we have identified is that we want to try to reach the most vulnerable vis-a-vis the lowest income folks possible in a selection process. And maybe given this other conversation, we just need to be less willing to say something about eligibility as opposed to prioritization for assistance. Would that meet with people as a way to try to potentially solve this? I know, Renee, you said 80% of area median income, but I don't think anyone on the task force has even uttered anything above 60% as something that the task force would want to talk about.
So when you say, Renee, 80% AMI, it's aligning with the city, 80% AMI pre-pandemic, correct? Is that the proposal on the table for people to consider?
Well, again, we're the administrator, so we're bringing it to your attention, the issues here. We're not making a recommendation one way or the other.
Okay.
But yes, the 80% is pre-COVID. So you've already, by doing that, you've identified the households that were vulnerable prior to the COVID pandemic. Now, post-COVID-19, their income could drop further from 80% of AMI, you know?
Right.
And that's where the condition exists, where they have had an economic or health impact of COVID-19. So their pre-pandemic, the fact that they're under 80% in their pre-COVID income already identifies them as a vulnerable population.
Right.
Now, what pulls them into a priority for funding, then that's the different criteria that you're selecting. On the opposite side, the county has post-COVID post-COVID income. So you get into the pool regardless of what your situation was before COVID-19. You get into the pool based on what your situation is now. So there's the vulnerability there based on income is the fact that they have now dropped below 60% of AMI, but their income could have been, or 50% of AMI, excuse me, but their income could have been significantly higher prior to COVID-19. So that's where the variances are. We're not making a recommendation one or the other than as an administrator, we would like to ensure that we have sufficient number of applicants in the pool so that we could serve the number of families that the funding is available for.
All right, so why don't we do this? I think if it meets with this group's approval, for purposes of the document that we need to vote on right now, I would recommend that we at least take a vote around the 60% of area median income right now, and then to the extent that when Baker Ripley works out the details with the city, they figure out a way to honor the aspiration I think that we have of reaching the folks that were extremely low income prior to the pandemic, that we trust that their process will allow that to happen. If that is at least a way to get us unstuck from right now so that we can vote on these principles. Because I think our goal is to try to present these to members of the city and the county this afternoon. So that's why I'm trying to really get us towards closure here. So with that, Rick and Jeremy, do y'all want to kind of take it from here?
Sure. So are you calling for a vote? These are recommendations, obviously, and some of them don't reconcile with what the city's already put out, but you know, we can propose what we want to propose.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is we are, I think we are recognizing that right now there are differences in the city and the county, and what I think the primary thing that we're trying to do is before tenant application periods are open to try to get this particular issue around which tenants can apply to get alignment between the city and the county on that.
I get that, but yeah, fine. So let's take a vote.
So around what we're suggesting right now is the primary recommendation that we have is around aligning the city and the county eligibility criteria together on both income qualifications and prioritization, and sort of explaining that aspirationally the goal that the task force has is to try to meet the folks that were the lowest income before COVID hit. So I think that's what, as I understand the sort of goal of that most of the folks that it seems as if have supported that aspirationally.
Right.
Is everybody clear with that? If not, let's please raise your hand so we can make sure everybody's clear on what we're voting on. Okay.
Okay. So I think Rick and Jeremy, if y'all want to.
Let's just do a roll call vote. I guess
okay,
Claire or Stephen, can you all just call the member of the task force?
Yeah, I'd say Claire. I mean, why don't we go to let's see people? So if you don't mind, Elaine, stop sharing your screen and then maybe just let Claire go through the task force members, unmute it. Remember when she calls your name, actually, why don't you just, it may be easier, Claire, if you just unmute everybody, if you can do that. that may speed us up since we're over anyway, and just go around and ask people to vote. And I would say, yeah.
I think an
Can
easy
you
way to.
say the question again?
They're going to be voting on the recommendations, the list of recommendations as you just shared as amended.
Wait a minute, before you start, Stephen, Rick, you have something?
Yeah, so with so many people, I think the best way to do it is anybody who has a no vote, let us know, and then if there are those few no votes, then we can, pass it that way. It's easier to do generally.
Okay.
Unless you have a lot of dissent, obviously.
And people should now have the ability to unmute themselves. I haven't quite found my ability to unmute you all.
Yes, so to be clear, if anyone opposes this, say that you oppose it, and that way we can, that way it's a lot easier to do generally.
Okay.
Okay. So anybody opposed, would you unmute and pose, please? And
I'll abstain from this vote if I could, given that it's a recommendation coming to the city.
Right.
Okay. Going once? Going twice? All right, we have a recommendation. Oh, there was somebody?
I just said it's at 60, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep, if we're at 60, that's great.
60 pre-pandemic. I also had that question. So 60 pre-pandemic.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All right.
I hold my peace.
Hear no objection? It's like when I do wait a minute. When I do a wedding, there's no objections. To move forward.
Okay.
So you've officially wed the city and the county's programs as far as the task force is
right.
concerned.
There you go.
If only it were that easy.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy to recommend. It's hard to get him to agree.
I really want to just say thank you to everybody. I know this has been a lot, and this is sort of a suboptimal way to do it on a big Zoom call, but really appreciate everybody weighing in. From a process standpoint, just so you all know, I think we're going to be presenting these to the city and the county leadership, and it will be beyond just the recovery czars. We're actually going to be meeting, I'm getting text real time as to who it's going to be, but it looks like there will be members of the chief of staff from each of the commissioner offices joining. So I think it just gets to the fact that really the work of this group is really being well received by our policymakers, and they're really open to receiving this real time. So appreciate everybody's working so quickly and cooperatively with that. With that, I think we will send out probably a time for next Friday when we'll be doing a broader presentation. I'm hoping that it will be on the results of some of the focus group work that Elena and her team have done. If so, just as somebody who's had a preview of it, I can just tell you, you'll want to join because it's amazing what the insights they've had are. With that, Rick and Jeremy, if you have anything else, that's all I've got.
I'm good.
I'm good. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Have a nice weekend, everybody.
You too.
And thanks. Sorry for running over. Bye-bye.